This is a video to help you through the activity on other fuel choices. So far, we've focused mostly on the catabolism of monosaccharides. We talked about how monosaccharides are converted into pyruvate through glycolysis, how pyruvate is converted into acetyl-CoA in aerobic metabolism, and how acetyl-CoA goes through the citric acid cycle to produce ATP and other energy molecules. And we've talked about how those energy molecules, the reduced dinucleotides, NADH and FADH2, go through the electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation to produce even more ATP. Today, we're going to talk about alternative fuel choices. We'll begin by discussing the catabolism of fatty acids. Fatty acids will be converted into acetyl-CoA, which will then go through the citric acid cycle. And during fatty acid metabolism, NADH and FADH are produced, and these things go through the electron transfer chain and oxidative phosphorylation to produce more energy for the cell. At the end of this activity, we'll also briefly touch on how proteins and amino acids are used for energy. But first, let's focus on fatty acids. On the first page of your activity is shown the complete beta oxidation of a fatty acyl-CoA that starts with 10 carbons. Notice that this is a fatty acid attached to a coenzyme A. We've seen coenzyme A before. During this cycle, you will end up splitting this molecule into two pieces. One will be a 2-carbon CoA called acetyl-CoA. This is the molecule that goes through the citric acid cycle to produce energy. The other piece is a longer molecule. So basically we take a 10-carbon molecule, we go through a cycle and end up with an 8-carbon molecule. In the first step of any beta oxidation cycle, FAD is converted to FADH2. The two hydrogens that are used to reduce FAD come from the fatty acyl-CoA. Remember that this is a skeletal structure. So this is a CH3 group here and CH2 groups all the way down until we get to the carbonyl carbon, which doesn't have any hydrogens on it. I'm going to draw the hydrogens on the carbons of interest here. Each of these two carbons has 2 hydrogens to begin with. And after the reaction is finished, there's a double bond between these two carbons and only 1 hydrogen remains on each carbon. Each of the carbons lost the hydrogen, and those hydrogens have been transferred to FAD to make FADH2. This is an oxidation reduction reaction where FAD is reduced and the fatty acyl-CoA is oxidized because it lost hydrogen atoms. In a second step, water is added. This is called a hydration reaction. Water is added to break a double bond and make it into a single bond. The water has been split into 2 pieces, an OH group and a hydrogen. The OH group has gone to this carbon, and this carbon has been oxidized. This carbon has gained the hydrogen. I'll draw it in there now. Here I'm showing that the original hydrogens on the molecule are black and the new hydrogen is red. So this hydrogen and this OH group came from water. This is a hydration reaction. This carbon was oxidized and this carbon was reduced. The carbon that was oxidized is called the beta carbon. The carbon next to the carbonyl group is called an alpha carbon, and the next one is called a beta, gamma, etc. This beta carbon is oxidized in this reaction. Look at what happens to it in the next reaction. Here we go from a single bond to oxygen to a double bond to oxygen. So this is even more oxidized than this one. This beta carbon undergoes many oxidation reactions during beta oxidation of fatty acyl-CoAs. This is where the name beta oxidation comes from, because the beta carbon is oxidized. In this third step, NAD plus is reduced to NADH plus a proton. The hydrogens that were used to reduce NAD plus came from this oxidized fatty acyl-CoA. This hydrogen here and this hydrogen were lost and a double bond remains between the carbon and the oxygen. The first and the third step of beta oxidation are oxidation reduction reactions. In the last step, another coenzyme A molecule comes in and breaks the bond between the alpha and beta carbons of the original fatty acyl-CoA. This breaking of a bond is very similar to a hydrolysis reaction. In a hydrolysis reaction, a hydrogen goes to one end of where the bond used to be, and the OH group would go to the other end. In this case, the hydrogen goes to one end and the coenzyme A goes to the other. Here's a carbon that has only 2 hydrogens in their reactant, but it has 3 hydrogens in the product. This hydrogen has gone here, and the rest of the coenzyme A has gone to the carbon. This bond broke, hydrogen goes to this side, and coenzyme A goes to this side. The products of this reaction are an acetyl-CoA, which will go through the citric acid cycle to produce energy, and a fatty acyl-CoA that is 2 carbons shorter than the original reactant. This molecule will go through an additional cycle of beta oxidation. Here I enter the second cycle with the 8-carbon molecule. I go through all of the same steps and end up with a fatty acyl-CoA, which is 2 carbons shorter, and another molecule of acetyl-CoA. The 6-carbon molecule will go through a third cycle and give me another 4-carbon molecule and an acetyl-CoA. The 4-carbon molecule will go through a last cycle to make 2 acetyl-CoAs as the product. Notice that this is a 10-carbon molecule that started. The 10-carbon molecule has 5 different 2-carbon pieces that can be used to make acetyl-CoA molecules. It's a 10-carbon molecule with 5 2-carbon pieces, but you only need to go through 4 cycles of beta oxidation because in the last cycle, 2 of the 2-carbon pieces are products. In each cycle of beta oxidation, you also produce 1 FADH2 molecule and 1 NADH. Since we go through 4 cycles to metabolize this 10-carbon fatty acid, 4 cycles yield 4 FADH2 molecules and 4 NADHs. It also gives you 5 acetyl-CoA molecules. All of these things will be turned into energy through the citric acid cycle and oxidative phosphorylation at the electron transport chain. Pause the video now and answer the questions on this page of the activity and the next page. I'd like to point out that to make this fatty acyl-CoA, you have to invest 2 molecules of ATP in the beginning. To make a fatty acid into a fatty acyl-CoA, it requires 2 ATP and a coenzyme A molecule. The result is a fatty acyl-CoA. So fatty acids cannot go through beta oxidation until they're converted into fatty acyl-CoAs. This requires an investment of 2 ATP. Use this information to answer the questions on your activity now. Then check the key to make sure you're correct before moving on to the next topic. Now we're going to look at how proteins and amino acids are used for fuel. Amino acids are broken down and their products can be turned into pyruvate, acetyl-CoA, or one of the intermediates in the citric acid cycle. Entering at any of these points will allow the products to go through at least part of the citric acid cycle and produce energy. A byproduct of protein metabolism is the ammonium ion, which is toxic, and it must be converted into urea and excreted in your urine. Let's talk about this briefly. Here's a general picture of an amino acid. Here's the protonated amine, the carboxylate, and the side chain, R1. In order to use amino acids for fuel, you first have to remove the amine group. This happens through transamination. Transamination is the process of removing the amine group from the amino acid. This product is called a keto acid, and it's used for fuel. It can be converted into pyruvate, acetyl-CoA, or one of the intermediates in the citric acid cycle. This ammonium ion is toxic, and it needs to be converted into another molecule before it causes damage in your cells. Ammonium ion is converted into urea by the urea cycle. Urea is then excreted in your urine. The keto acid, which is produced in transamination, can be used for fuel, but it can also re-enter transamination. This is another keto acid, which is part of the transamination cycle. Let's talk about how these molecules are used for fuel. The amino acids can be converted into keto acids, which then can be converted into one of the intermediates along this pathway. If the amino acid is part of a 3-carbon family, it can be converted into the 3-carbon molecule pyruvate. There are other places along this cycle where amino acids can enter depending on how many carbons are in their intermediates. The 5-carbon family amino acids will enter at alpha ketoglutarate, and the 4-carbon family of amino acids will enter at one of these places along the citric acid cycle. There's also a place here at acetyl-CoA where some of the amino acids can enter the citric acid cycle at the very start. Amino acids that enter at pyruvate or acetyl-CoA will produce the most energy for the cell. But as amino acids are entering partway through the cycle, they produce less energy. This is one of the reasons why proteins are not ideal sources of energy, because they don't produce as much energy for the cells, in addition to the fact that they produce the toxic byproduct ammonium ion. Here are some of the amino acids that enter at these places. It's not necessary to memorize these amino acids, but to have a general understanding that a 3-carbon amino acid like alanine would enter at pyruvate, and a 4-carbon amino acid like asparagine would enter at one of the 4-carbon intermediates on the citric acid cycle. Thanks for watching this video on other fuel choices. Please take the time to answer the questions and check the key to make sure that you're correct. If you have any questions about this video, please feel free to post them in the comment section. And if this video is helpful for your learning, please let me know by giving me a thumbs up.